Finally, after what might be the longest wait possible, we have the brand new tech tree within World of Tanks console, which is the Soviet double-barreled tanks, which have been actually confirmed as to when they will be entering into the game, which will be Tuesday, the January 9th. So, of course, this Tuesday, we will be seeing finally the tier 8, 9 and 10 Soviet double-barreled heavies, as they do lead off of a already existing tier 7, and we'll get into that in a second. And that tier 7 is the KV-3. But the new Soviet dual barrel heavies, we have all of the statistics at least for the main kind of tank characteristics that each of the tanks have, and we'll go through each one individually, and then we've got some pretty decent news when it comes to the rest of the game, and we've got a few operations, some novel and unique game modes that are going to be coming in as well, which is brilliant, and so we'll cover everything that you need to know for next week on World of Tanks console. So straight off the bat, well, we have 3 new tanks. Obviously, they are all Soviet double barrels, and they come in the form of the IS-22. We've got the IS-32 and then the ST-2. So essentially, almost take the heavy tanks, but then take the tier below and put 2 next to it, and that's what you end up with at a tier higher. So you end up with the IS-2, which is a typical tier 7 vehicle that's actually with the double barrel mechanic, a tier 8. So with that being said, we can have a look at each one individually. So the IS-2-2 is of course coming off of the KV-3. Now if you've already unlocked the KV-3 and you've got the KV-4, I am pretty sure that you will be able to actually get the next one. So, for example, if you elite the tier 7 KV-3 before the branch is added, the IS-2 will automatically be unlocked, so you will not have to grind at all. Or alternatively, if you are working your way towards getting the dual barrel tanks in the future and you want to make sure that you're kind of going to get there as quickly as possible, well, just make sure that you're grinding out the KV-3 and of course make sure you get as far as you can before Tuesday. So then when it comes to getting the actual dual barrels, you can get them pretty much straight away. So with that being said, the IS-2-2 is of course the tier 8. Now we do already have a tier 8 double barreled vehicle in the Object 703-2. Now this is a much better tank, to be honest with you, the premium version, than the actual tech tree version, which is the IS-2-2. And that is primarily because the armor model of the IS-2-2 is not very good. You can get penned by basically every single tank in the game through the front, which is not ideal. You can get some ricochets on the upper plate potentially, but for the most part you're going to get penned by a lot of things. And in a tier 10 matchup, yeah, this thing is, its armor doesn't really hold up, even though the turret is, typically quite sloped, and you would think that it might be able to bounce a few rounds. It is not the best at all, and of course you are sat basically on an IS hull, which, if you don't already know, that thing doesn't have any armor. So, you've got that to contend with. But, of course, this tank isn't all terrible. The gun is actually slightly better than with the 703-2. That's because you get reduced alpha damage per shell, so you got 300 alpha per shell, as opposed to the 390 you get on the premium version. This, of course, does 2 lots of that if you're going to fire them all at once, or potentially, firing off one and then firing off the other barrel. That's kind of how they work. And you can end up doing quite a bit of damage with these tanks if you play them correctly. Now, starting off, the main armament of this tank is the 100mm S34D, so you can get this on both of the tank. Now, this is the fully upgraded version. There will be less fully upgraded versions, but for the sake of this, of course, Wargaming have only provided us with the fully upgraded statistics, so we'll have a look at those anyway, and that's probably where you're going to be playing the majority of your games in anyway. This tank has 7 degrees gun depression, so it's quite flexible for a heavy tank, which is brilliant. That's what you want when you're in a tank that doesn't particularly have the best armor, because you need to make use of every opportunity you can, because if you're taking damage without being able to deal a lot of damage back, or potentially, you're overexposing yourself in flatter terrains and stuff like that to be able to get shots because your gun depression might not be 7 degrees, for example, then yeah, this tank will get punished quite hard. But 7 degrees makes it quite workable. And I think that's fair for this tank. You don't want them to be too strong or too overpowered or anything like that. And I feel like that's kind of a nice little spot in terms of its damage, but versus the gun depression as well. So with those two shots, obviously 600 if you do them both together. And you might be thinking, well, are they actually going to hit? Well, the accuracy is 0.38, which isn't awful. And of course, with some of the boosts that we get on console, things like steady aim, and of course, using some of the potential equipment that you can have in the game, and using your commanders that have a ton of different boosts, you can significantly get this down, probably in the region of about 0.3 to be honest with you. So yeah, this tank is going to be more than accurate, and I think it will be absolutely fine. Obviously this isn't a sniper tank anyway, so you're going to be fairly up close and personal to a lot of the tanks that you're playing against, so accuracy not really a problem when it comes to this tank. The reload is 9.7 seconds on each of the guns, with 1,857 damage on each one. There are a few nuances to it, because obviously if you fire them both at the same time, you end up with reduced DPM, that sort of thing, and as you kind of work through it, it really depends on how you play the tank as to what the damage per minute is, but typically you're not often able to get off multiple shots in one engagement. Maybe you are, maybe one bounces, maybe one misses. You never really know with these tanks, so it's very difficult to gauge where the effective damage per minute of these vehicles is going to be, but they're pretty solid as a heavy tank goes, so I think that, you know, it'll be okay, especially considering some of the rapid loading perk that you can put on your commander as well, which I highly recommend. That will boost this up as well, so yeah, should make it very, very kind of mid-range / some of the higher DPMs that you can get, considering you have two barrels that reload simultaneously, if that makes sense. Anyway, you then have 350 view range, so on the poor side you're not really spotting with this tank, hence why you want to be up close and personal. And then the penetration is 221 on the standard rounds, which is somewhat limiting, but it's not awful. You can definitely pen things with that. And then 256 with the premium. Once again, not anything absolutely broken or anything like that, but a good range for a heavy tank where you can deal with most vehicles you're coming up against in if you're hitting their weak points, and even some of like the other heavy tanks that you'll meet, you can just pen them through the front anywhere with 256, dependent on the tank that you're facing. Obviously, if it's a VK1001P, for example, you probably don't want to just auto aim it. You want to make sure that you're aiming, and of course, when you do that with 256 pen, you're going to be absolutely fine, and for the most part, with your standard rounds, you'll probably be fine as well. Now, that is, of course, the IS-2-2. This is an okay vehicle. It's nothing exceptional, and it's nothing absolutely garbage, and that's kind of how they play on PC as well. Hence, they've been out for about, I don't even want to comment on how long they've been out for, probably in the region about 5 years or something like that, 4 years, maybe even longer, I'm not entirely sure, but they've been out for a long time either way, and so we've been waiting for them for a long time as well. So with that being said, they then move on to the IS-3-2. Now you need 360,000 XP to be able to get this tank, and that's purely from all of the modules from the IS-2-2 and then getting the actual tank itself. So 359,000 XP. It's absolutely fine. That's kind of on the bog standard range of what XP values you're typically required to be able to get the next tank, which is fine. And then of course 3.57 million silver to be able to actually purchase it, which is awesome. So yeah, you know, it's your absolute standard values for tier 9 tanks, so there's no real change there. It's not like you're gonna have to spend more or less. So yeah, either way, what is this tank all about? Well, this is of course the IS-3 hull armor that has some kind of weird turret that is slightly better than the IS-3's turret, to be honest with you, at least from what you would picture it to be, because it has that shape. But the problem with this is that the top of the tank, you can see very, very weak on the top of the tank, and that means that you can get penned through the top of the tank if people have a huge caliber. So I'm thinking Jaegeroos, that sort of thing, they're going to pen you either straight through the cheeks or in the top of the turret. And the same thing will be said for things like the 704, that sort of tank. They should be able to just go straight through the top of your tank, or if they catch any of the actual kind of hull armor of your tank, the lower portion obviously, then they're just going to go straight through that as well, because it is only an IS-3, and the IS-3 doesn't typically have the best armor in the game. But of course that's not it. You do have that 390 alpha damage on this tank, so you go up from 300 to 390 when you look at the IS-3-2. Once again, this is the fully upgraded version. This tank goes 38 kilometers an hour. It's reasonably fast, if I'm going to be honest, because all of these tanks are actually quite fast when it comes to a heavy tank. They're not sluggish and they feel really nice when you play them. The horsepower to ton ratio, not the most insane, so it is quite sluggish when it comes to kind of getting up to that top speed, but when you're there, it feels really nice, at least going off of the PC versions of the tank that I've played. Then 15 kilometers an hour reverse speed is fine, whatever. Hull traverse and turret traverse does kind of suck on these tanks, so it's not particularly the fastest at turning at all. So you can get circled by light tanks, you can get circled by a lot of medium tanks as well, which make this tank a little bit annoying to play in all honesty, but at the same time, when you're fighting up close and personal, you should be able to maintain your armor frontally to opponents and not be able to get YOLO'd anyway, because usually you'll have a little bit of team support, so it's not that big of an issue. But when you do get circled, you'll know about it because it is not the best at all. So this tank gets an extra degree of gun depression, which is really nice. You can be able to use a lot more ridge lines with this tank. Not too much more than the previous, obviously, but considering some of the Soviet heavies might only get 5 or 6 degrees of gun depression, this one's pretty good, and so you're going to be quite mobile and useful on those ridge lines, which is fantastic. And you can also hide that top of the turret as well, making the armor even more effective. You have 390 alpha, but the standard penetration is 243, and then the premium is 292. This is primarily pretty fine. Most medium tanks at tier 10, which have typically quite good penetration, will be sat at around 260. So you're just under those, and so yeah, you should be able to pen most vehicles with this tank with standard. And then of course, if you do need it, the premium rounds are also there. This tank also gets APCR as its premium round, which is the best round for tracking targets at long ranges. Obviously, you're in a heavy tank, so you shouldn't really be sniping at the back. So predominantly get forward, use the rounds when you need, and when light tanks, medium tanks are trying to like scoot away from you, trying to get away, or for maps like Prokhorovka, which are kind of a bit more open and people can be spotted out in the open, that sort of thing, and they're moving at high speeds, the APCR rounds are nice. But remember, when you do swap ammunition in this tank, it is one of those things where you are going to swap both of them at the same time. You can't load one shell in one half of the tank and then one shell in the other half. It will reload them both and reset the reload on loading on both of the barrels. So when you do choose your ammunition, you have to stick with it at least until you fired off your shells, or, you know, take the sacrifice of losing out on the reload that you already had done. So that's kind of how they work. HE would never recommend it in a double barrel tank, even though they do get very nice HE damage. The penetration is okay, but remember, like, you're going to have to reload both of them. So unless you fired both of your shells and then you want to swap to HE, maybe carrying 2 rounds might be useful, maybe 4, whatever you want to take. But for the most part, yeah, just make up your own mind when it comes to that and decide whether you're going to risk loading those HE rounds just in case you come up against something like a Waffle E100 or a Waffle Panzer IV. They're a nice addition, but try not to use them all too much unless you know you're going to actually pen something. Then we have 0.4 accuracy, which is slightly higher than the tier 8, but it's not anything real bad. That's because you get more alpha damage, and as I said, you'll probably get this down to about 0.33, 0.34 when you're using your equipment and that sort of stuff, so don't worry about that really. A damage per minute, 1966 on both of the guns. Obviously, as we spoke about, very difficult to actually highlight how much damage per minute they actually do because of loads of different factors. You know, if you're swapping ammo, if you're doing all of that sort of stuff, it makes a huge difference to how these tanks actually have those damage per minute. But for the most part, very decent damage per minute for a heavy tank, and kind of in the higher upwards range of heavy tanks, to be honest with you, if you're firing them correctly and you're not kind of messing up and firing both at the same time and then loading one, firing it off, and then not reloading both of them and that sort of stuff. So it really depends how you play it. And we'll get into that when we actually do the reviews of these tanks later on. And that will come when they're actually released into the game. Obviously, I don't have them, much like you guys. I can't actually play them or anything. We can only assume based off of their statistics and how the other tanks that we've had with the double shot mechanic actually play in the game. So with that being said, 380 meters view range, significant advantage over the tier 8, and you should be able to spot quite a few things, especially if they're firing at you in bushes, that sort of thing. 380 view range, fine, really should be pretty decent. And so overall, IS 3-2 is okay. I think it's up there with some of the better heavies, but I'm not going to say it's going to be super competitive. The armor doesn't particularly work, and it can be a bit of a pain when it comes to fighting tanks in open kind of field areas. So town maps are going to be where these tanks really dominate, but in those open maps it will be a lot harder. And so yeah, just be careful when you are coming up against people. Remember, your armor doesn't really mean anything when you expose the hull of these tanks, so yeah, be careful. Either way, then we have the ST2. This is, of course, the Soviet tier 10 double-barreled vehicle, and this will cost you 402,000 XP to go from the tier 9 to the tier 10, obviously with all of the modules including that sort of stuff. So yeah, either way, the ST2. Now, this is the ST1's hull armor with the ST2 turret with a double barrel. So yeah, I mean, it is pretty decent when it comes to PC and how it plays on there. And I'm assuming that it'll be quite good on console as well. And that's because you can deal 2 shots of 440 alpha damage, which makes this very, very nice to play. Not only that, you've also got a few extra kind of stuff when it comes to this tank. You've got a speed limit of 40 kilometers an hour. Maybe taking some speed boosting equipment could be really beneficial in this tank to improve the power to weight ratio, and that will make it just a little bit more smooth to get up to top speed, maintaining that speed over different terrains and stuff. So yeah, we can have a look at that when we actually play it. Hull traverse, like the other ones, are not particularly great, so you can get out traversed in this. 8 degrees a second, 8 degrees. Gun depression is also, as you with the tier 9, very good for a heavy tank. And then 20 degrees of elevation, no real problem with that. And then the penetration on the standard rounds, 258, which is fine, up there with, you know, basic standard heavy tanks at this tier. 310 heat pen, which is amazing. And of course 68 HE pen with the same alpha as the tier 9. So realistically, it's even less worth taking those HE rounds in this tank as well, but it could be useful for Waffle Panzer 4s, Waffle E100s, your Bat Chats, that sort of stuff. And of course, yeah, just make sure that you're using it if you do want to when you fired both of your standard rounds, because you'll just waste shells otherwise. Aim time 3 seconds, quite slow. Accuracy 0.4. Obviously, as we said, accuracy not too bad of a problem when it comes to that. So I wouldn't worry too much. And of course, when you got all your accuracy perks and skills or whatever you want to call them in the game into your tank, it'll be fine. And with some of the equipment as well that we can put in the tank, it should be pretty good. Reload 12.5 seconds for one of the rounds, and then 2,000 damage per minute, which can be boosted obviously with how the tank actually plays with the double barrels, that sort of stuff, and it can be quite effective because of the fact that, you know, if you've reloaded one of your rounds, you're also then reloading a next one, which most tanks don't have the option of that. As soon as they've reloaded, every single second that lasts after that is just wasted damage per minute. These tanks don't have that problem. You know, if you've made it past the first reload and you're reloading your second shell, then you are essentially gaining DPM still, and you've not actually fully utilized it. So it's good to get extra damage per minute when it comes to these tanks, which is what they're all about. And then you've got 0.4 accuracy, as we said, good. Damage per minute, 2,000. Rounds, you've got 20 rounds, so it's not particularly the most either. So yeah, it can be a bit of a pain. And I'm pretty sure that maybe these stack together so that you've got 40 rounds total. I don't know whether Wargaming is saying maximum ammo in one gun versus the other. Not entirely sure. I would assume it's that, because 20 rounds would be absolutely horrible to try and play with in this game, and would mean the maximum damage you could do was 880. If they've done that, that is very, very bad, but hopefully that's not the case. And I'm assuming it is 40 rounds total. That was what I would assume. So yeah, if it's anything else, I don't even know what they've done. But yeah, either way, the shell velocity of these rounds is a bit pants, to be honest with you. 920 meters a second on the heat, as you can expect, quite slow round anyway. AP is 940, whereas when you compare to the tier 9, this one gets 1,000 and 1,259. So A little bit more difficult at range, can be quite slower, but remember this is supposed to be played as a brawling heavy tank to maintain use of the damage per minute and use that double pump mechanic as well. So yeah, not really anything you can complain about in that department anyway. So yeah, it is what it is. 390 meters view range, obviously when you're using advanced optics, if you're going to do that in your game, it is worth using to a degree. And then when it comes to the armor, the ST2 actually has a little bit of armor. The upper plate can bounce quite a few rounds. The lower plate is actually pretty strong as well. The turret is quite strong, except from this cupola, which can be penned. But even then, you've got a poke in front of the double barrel, so you can get hit quite hard when you're trying to pen this thing, because it isn't the easiest thing to hit when you're trying to come around a corner to deal a shot of damage. You're then having to readjust your aim, and by that time this thing could have hit you either once or twice, depending on what the player chooses to do that's playing it. Or alternatively, you could bounce off of it or something like that. But yeah, most of the time you'll get penned through the cupola either way. But just be sure that, yeah, this is the weak point. This is where you want to be aiming. And of course the lower plate, if you see the hull armor, or if it's angled slightly, you want to go for this plate here, since it is a kind of a squashed plate. It kind of comes down here. It's kind of almost like the IS-3, but there's a central flat section, if that makes sense, and then they're kind of pushed out. So the wings, I don't know what you actually call this in terms of tank armor, but it's this portion here. It kind of comes down at an angle and gives you a bouncing angle. So when it does side scrape, you can pen quite easily here. So that's just another advantage to know when you come up against these tanks. But either way, looking very, very good. I think that these are quite balanced. I think that they should be very good in the game, and we'll just have to wait and see what they're actually like when they do come into the game. And I'll be grinding these out. Maybe we'll do it on stream during one of the days when they do come out. So either with that out of the way and the Soviet double barrels actually come into the game for once, we can start moving over to the actual news. And this is where we get a few extra bits of information. Now this is on the World of Tanks console Discord. Obviously some of you might be in there, some of you might not. But either way, we'll go through what they've actually said as to what's coming next week. So in 2024, this is the first developer stream update. So we are getting a earn operation for the T-34-3. Now this is a Chinese medium tank that is a premium tank, and it's a pretty decent one. It is an earn points operation. I believe it will probably last a week or two to be able to get it, and you can get it completely for free. You don't have to pay anything, just playing the game. You'll need 225 points in total. Usually with these point operations, it will either be an XP requirement, which it is here, or you'll have something like get so much damage and then you'll get some, or maybe it would be place in the top 7 like this one, or it could be, get 1000 XP and you'll get 1 point. That's kind of how Wargaming typically do it. They do have some variations, but they're primarily how you get the point operations done. Now, this is placing in the top 7 XP earners. Usually what they'll do is if you place number 1, you'll get additional points. If you place number 2, you get 2 to 3, you'll get slightly less. And then when you place in the top 7, you get more points. So you might end up with like 3 to 1 points, and so it can take you quite a long time to actually get it. Obviously, if you are a average player, you probably come top 7 every other game, or 2 out of 3 games, something like that. And for the more experience, you're going to be getting points at every single game, basically. So yeah, that's kind of how they work. And yeah, essentially for most people, it probably take you in the region about 250 games. So if you play that in 2 weeks, then yeah, it is what it is. But don't sweat the stuff just to get a tank on a game. Just enjoy the game if you're enjoying it, and hopefully get the tank in the time. And of course, if you're super close, maybe you want to sweat it out for the last day or two. But if you're a long shot off, don't bother. It's not that much of an urgent thing to get the T-34-3, which is a good tank, but not particularly that competitive in today's meta. But maybe it will get some buffs and love in the future. Either way, it's a free premium tank that I don't think we can complain about at all. Now then, we have got these Super 10s. This is the new kind of modes that Wargaming are testing out, where it's a 7 versus 7 team destruction in tier 10 tanks, much like we had with the Holiday 8s where you could play tier 8 tanks 7 versus 7. This one is tier 10 7 versus 7. You've got a variety of different maps that you can play, so you've got Himmelsdorf, Mines, Cliff, Ghost Town, Pilsen Airfield, Port and Berlin, and all of these maps are, as you say, pretty towny maps, so you're going to be using a lot of heavy tanks by the looks of things. Yeah, basically all of them have heavy tank areas, so yeah, no Prokhorovka, no real light tank maps, so I very much doubt anyone's going to be using a light tank in the tier 10 7 versus 7 mode, but it's kind of there. It also comes with its own challenge where you can get double silver for doing any of the following, which is 500 damage or 500 assist or detect 2 tanks. So double silver when you're playing the mode. Not sure if it's going to be a repeatable silver earn challenge or whether it's just a one-stop shop sort of thing. Yeah, it will depend. Maybe it will be a one kind of 2 times silver boost for every single tank that you own. You can only do it once per tank per day. We're not entirely sure. It doesn't give that information here, but obviously when you go into the game, when the update goes live, you should be able to do it. Either way. Moving on, then we have the 9th of December. These tier 10s will be available in the store. We've got the Object 260, the 268 V5, the T95 E6, the Object 907, the T95 FE201 Chieftain, and the VK 7201K, which you can all pick up from the Wargaming store. Of course, these are very expensive to be able to do it, so whether or not you want to spend your money to be able to buy these is completely down to you, but they are selling them in the store. And then there are a few tier 10s which will be available for free XP. If you want to buy them for free XP, all you have to do is go to the premium tech tree in the game. So go to tech trees, go to the premium store, and then you'll be able to get filter by tier 10. And then when you go to tier 10, it will say like 380,000 free XP, something like that. And you can do that. So yeah, make of that what you will. Obviously, we have a load more tanks as well. So we've got the WZ-111 Quillin, the M60-121B, Set Object 780, the M4A2 T54E2, the T22 Medium 279E, SU-152 Turan, which I don't know why they keep selling this tank because it really is annoying. But either way, it's in the game again for free XP. And then there'll be 30% off Tech Tree tier 10s throughout the entire week, 50% off on cosmetics, so skins, that sort of stuff, and 25% off equipment as well. And then, of course, the Soviet double barrel Tech Tree. And there's one last thing that we'll cover in this video, but of course, there is both of these. In terms of the best tanks that I like and I think that are very good in the game, we have, of course, got the T95 FE4201 Chieftain. It's a fun one, it's good, and is another Chieftain basically that you can get. The VKK is actually quite good, really fun. It's like a Panzer 7, which is like the King Lerva in the tech tree, but it gets more alpha damage, which is good. And then you've got the WZ-111 Quillin, which is pretty good. The Object 279E, as you know, very novel, unique, kind of weird tank that kind of works against tier 8s and 9s, but against tier 10 tank destroyers can be penned, and tier 10's basically firing premium, so it's not as good as it is on PC. And then the SU-152 Turan, which you can pick up as well, is very, very powerful. So those are kind of the tanks that I'd highlight. The Object 260 is good, and of course the 907's okay as well. But yeah, other than that, there's not too much to be said for the other tier 10s, but they're really down to personal preference and what you think that you actually like in the game. Moving on then, this is the last thing that we'll cover in today's video. We have the community contributor program. Of course, I am a part of it, and so they've made some changes. This is what they've got on their Intel page. So Wargaming have said this, we have made changes to our volunteer programs in order to modernize it and update it. Unfortunately, that meant we had to part ways with some of the contributors and ambassadors. However, the door is not shut to them, so they can always join back. And for all of those that have parted ways, they've provided them with an updated requirements and have already set a time frame in which we conduct a second review in conjunction with them, so they'll be able to join back if they'd like to and meet the requirements or whatever. So yeah, either way, for those currently with us in the program, they've all agreed to be or to the updated requirements, which is yes, I am part of that, and we are currently in a transition phase so that everyone knows what's expected from both sides of the table. We look forward to seeing the program flourish and develop across this year and beyond. And don't forget to tune into the community stream on Tuesday to check out those new dual barrel tanks. So yeah, there is of course a new community contributor program, or an updated version of it basically. So obviously there are a few people that are going to be a little bit salty or whatever, and if you see some of the people that you watch and they're no longer a contributor or an ambassador, that's probably why, or maybe they chose to leave. You know, their reasoning for it is of course up to them to decide whether they want to tell you or share with you, etc. But of course, yeah, I wish them all of the best, and of course if they want to join back, then I'm there. And of course if they want to do any kind of content, feel free to reach out with me. I can't guarantee anything because yeah, I am very, very busy with both full-time work and of course trying to run 3 different YouTube channels as well. So yeah, just be aware that it may not be a super quick reply. I just want to clarify that, but either way, of course, then that is really it. I felt like we needed to talk about it. There were, of course, people mentioning this in the comment section, so just clarifying this in the update, and I think Wargaming wanted to do this as well. So yeah, either way, looking good for the new year. I'm looking forward to what Wargaming have to bring for the new year, even if the first release of a tank was a little bit annoying, to say the least, even though it's not that broken or anything. It's not that annoying. It's more of like an annoying mechanic, etc. The tank isn't very good. We're talking about the Churchill AVRE here. But yeah, either way, it's just annoying that we got that sort of tank to begin with rather than something else. But luckily, got some new tanks coming into the game. This is the T-34-3, for those of you wondering what it actually looks like. Got 390 Alpha. So yeah, looking forward to seeing what you guys say in the comment section down below, and hopefully you enjoyed this video. It was a fairly long one, but I felt like we could run through all of those new Soviet double barrels. And if you want to see any gameplay and you want to see some tier 10 medium action with a really good gameplay, then the AMX30B should be on screen on the left, and then the gameplay and tank reviews playlist, where you'll see loads of different gameplay and tank reviews, on the right hand side. If you enjoyed, leave a like, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks, have a great day.